So we were picking back up in our 4-part sermon series. We had a week off from me being down at the beach, and I thank you, Pastor Andy, for sharing the word with the people last week. But we're going to pick back up in our sermon series. It's a 4-part sermon series, and it's looking at the book of Ruth. When we've had this little idiom that we have tapped to it, you said, "You just never know." Have you ever heard that one, or have you ever used it before? And that idiom we said is really, it's an idiom that we say, and it often indicates like uncertainty. You just never know. You have a question mark when you say it. You just never know. Things may turn out right. Which also suggests this idiom may be giving us hope, and that things will, in fact, turn out okay. How do you use it when you ever say that idiom? You just never know. It could be both ways. Something that you may be going through in life right now, you may have that question mark. You just never know how it's going to turn out. But hopefully, as you walk with the Lord, you'll see that He can even use His good within those challenging moments. And at part 1, if you haven't been with us for this sermon series, or you've forgotten since we had a week off, we looked at part 1, looking at the 4 chapters. So part 1, we looked at Ruth chapter 1, and it's basically that one, knowing about this story. You had this Israelite family that was living in Israel, but because of a great famine, moved to a foreign land. And it was Naomi and Elimelech and her 2 sons. They moved to the Moabite countryside, and while there then too, Naomi's husband Elimelech died, and then also both her sons died. Well, her sons were already married to Moabite women, and as there we had a decision in week 1 where they decided to come back, but only one of them, and that happens to be Ruth, that would come back to the homeland with her. And she actually said to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go, and your God will be my God." And we, as a takeaway after that first week, saying that's an important step for all of us in our lives, to actually recognize at some point, to say in your life, to make this decision, Jesus, where you go, I will go, and you will be my God. Surrendering your life and your life's path to the Lord through that first week. And then second week, in chapter 2 then, we realized that when they came back, there was just no provision there for them, right? They didn't have that husband or the sons to actually work the fields, their own land, so they were troubled at that point, and they had this practice of gleaning. And if you don't know what gleaning is, go back and listen to that sermon from that sermon series. But God provided for him. His grace and His favor poured out upon them through a man named Boaz. So, by the way, living in the period of the Judges, a very difficult time where everyone was doing as they saw fit. Boaz was a godly man living in a godly way, being obedient to the Lord, and he provides for Naomi, also through Ruth, for gleaning in those fields. And we said that week, a takeaway, that Jesus is our ultimate, because Boaz was the guardian redeemer. Jesus for us is our guardian redeemer and restoring our brokenness. And one of the other takeaways we said, that with God, you're an oasis in the desert. Instead of being with all the bad things that are going around in this world, maybe we could be an oasis for people in the desert in their life. That catches up kind of to what our part 3, as we look at chapter 3 today, when we look at, in all things, God works. Do you believe that little line? Do you believe God works, look at this, in all circumstances of life? Even when you drop your ice cream, does God work in those situations as well? Well, we know from the New Testament, since this is an Old Testament book, let's jump to the New Testament. And it says in Romans 8:28, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. And that's one of those challenging verses that we hear. God works for good, even in the bad things that happen in my life. Let's hold on and let's unpack this a little bit later. Because in the life of Ruth, we see this, right? She chose to follow God in the darkness of her life. In the challenging things, she had lost her husband, she had lost her homeland, went to a different place, and she's gleaning in the fields, and God is providing for her in that way through the harvest of the gleaning. But let's not understand something. Let's get this through. But now the harvest has finished. They're done. If you didn't know, I haven't tried intentionally to try and time this sermon series with the wheat fields in our land right now. Did you happen to notice, are all the wheat fields cut now? They're cut down, right? In fact, before I left for vacation, they were still some of the fields I could see because the grain was heavy on them and they were leaning over. But now they're harvested. And I wanted to give you as that visual illustration when you look at the fields now are barren. Now what for Ruth and Naomi? If they were making the provision that God was providing for them in the fields, and God was giving them the ability to glean, but now the fields are empty. Where do you get the provision now? What do you do now? It doesn't look like God's going to provide now. There's no more gleaning left. It's finished. Even the way chapter 2 concluded in verse 23, it said to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished. It's finished. What does that mean? God's done with them? How will God provide for Ruth and Naomi living in this foreign land without provision? Isn't it the thing? If you've already read this book, you know how it all works out. The happy ending. Let me just say this for you right now. If you're in the midst of something, do you know how it's going to work out? You do not. And that makes the awareness of this, that understand that Ruth and Naomi, at this point, the gleaning's finished. Provision is done. How will God provide again? And sometimes we as believers will think that, well, God provided for me now. I guess he's done with me. He's not going to provide again. Is that what we are to walk away with in this story? So let's ponder this. How will God continue to work for good in the life of Ruth? What's he got cooking? What's he planning to do here? Which, by the way, since we're trying to tie this whole series into our lives, how about you? How will God continue to work for good, not just in Ruth's life or in this Old Testament story, but also in your life? Can he do it? Can he provide? If you're now facing some sort of uncertainty in your life, God, will he continue to work for good in your life? Let's continue to look at this, because something to think here, as we said, you don't know in advance, right? Do we? It's not usually known by his followers in advance what's going to happen. If you put yourself in this story today, you don't know, they didn't know, and if you're going through something today, you don't know either. But I want you to consider this. If you have read this story before, when you look in hindsight, you see how God worked, right? What have you learned from God when viewing in hindsight? Because I think about my own life. Maybe you can think about your own walk with the Lord if it's been through any amount of years. At 21, I was a single guy. And all I know was I was working and doing many things for the Lord. And at the beach this past week, talking to my sons, they're in their 20s now too, that same period I was in. And I couldn't help but think, they're both single dudes, you know? And they're talking like, well, what are we going to do? We're going to get married someday. And, you know, we're just all joking around as a family. But it made me kind of think. When I was in my early 20s too, I would sit there and kind of say, Lord, what's your direction for me? What's your plan? And I would pray, Lord, provide me with a wife, you know, like provide me someone who I could be married or start a family with. But it waited from 21 to 29. That's a long time to wait. 8 years of waiting. But yet, when I look in hindsight to those years, and I said this to my boys this past week, God is building you up and working and doing something in that season as well. And those years, I was so involved in different things of the church, it probably got me very comfortable in what I'm doing today as a pastor. But I didn't see that at that time period. Only when I looked, in hindsight, could I see it. So let me say this to you. Maybe if you're going through something right now, you may not know exactly what the Lord's doing today. But in the future, you'll look back, hopefully, and see where the hand of the Lord was working. That's usually some of the best ways we get to see God working, in hindsight. You know, we just don't see what he's doing today. It's a little frustrating for believers at times. It's frustrating for me in my life. Maybe you feel that same way. But it's beautiful to look back in hindsight to see what the Lord can do. So maybe right now as you're going through it, but hey, a year from now, you may be able to see what God is doing. So let's look at, as we've been saying, Ruth chapter 3 today. And here we have Ruth and Boaz, he's the guardian redeemer, at the threshing floor. And we're looking at verses 1 to 18. If you want to follow along in your pew Bibles, I decided to put that page number up there every week so you can open your Bibles to page 260 as we look at Ruth chapter 3 today. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be provided for." See what I'm saying? They don't know what's going on. She's saying, Naomi's, I got to take care of this. I got to get a way for her to be provided. I'm going to take care of this. So look at this. So now Boaz, with whose woman you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." And I like her response. "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. I got news for you. Anything touches my feet in the middle of the night, I'm waking up instantly. It's not going to be like half a night later in the middle of the night. Something hits my feet. Whenever a dog moves on my feet, I feel it. So in the middle of the night, though, so it's taken a little while, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" It was dark, he asked, because he knew Ruth. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men." So that tells you there is an age difference between the two of them, whether rich or poor. "And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives," that's covenantal language, "I will do it. Lie here until morning." This is nothing of sexual nature going on here, by the way. So she lay there at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed a bundle on her. Then he went back to town. Do you see God's provision again? God's pouring out, providing for her and also Naomi. Now when Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Because, that's what mother-in-law would know what's going on there. Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" God's provision once again. And we close off this chapter, verse 18, it says, "Then Naomi said, 'Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today.'" And that's where we close our story today. Let's go back here. Now, if you're hearing that story, and I purposely did this, there may have been things that we've been saying, what we've been calling the 3C throughout this sermon series. Cultural context confusion. There's things that you may have heard in that story and said, "What the heck are they talking about?" And the first one may have been, "This seems weird, doesn't Naomi's plan set up for Ruth?" Trying to work out what you think maybe could be God's provision. No, she's working it out for herself. We're going to unpack that a little bit. Also, another one. What in the world is a threshing floor? There's something else you may be asking yourself today. Another one is, what's this whole deal of uncovering and laying at feet? I'm not a feet guy. I don't like people touching my feet. I don't like people laying at my feet. I'm ticklish now. I don't like it at all. What's the deal going on with this whole practice of uncovering and laying at Boaz's feet? And the last one, then she's even spreading out the corner of her garment on it. What the heck's going on here? We're going to unpack that now. So let's first take that first one. Naomi's plan set up. What's her deal with all this process? Why would Naomi begin to play matchmaker here for Ruth with Boaz? What's the deal here? Is there something going on? I think there's something that's important. Even instructs her to clean up. Because would you agree with that? You want to go on a date with somebody, what do you typically do? Clean yourself up, take a shower, put some good clothes on. You look a lot better than you normally look, right? You want to clean yourself up a little bit, and that's what she instructs Ruth to do in this moment. But understand also that that her mourning period, and I think this is important, I think this is why Naomi even comes up with this process. This is not something that happened immediately after her husband had died or her son had died. So after some time, she has encouraged her daughter-in-law to clean herself up because the mourning season is over. It's okay for her to redeem this or to look after something with this and this whole process. And it is fascinating, too, what this happens at a threshing floor, which, by the way, before we move on to that, the fact that she agrees to it right away. Isn't that interesting, too? That there is a relationship that did exist already between Ruth and Boaz. And it's one thing. Can I just say this right now? You go on a first date. Does anyone intentionally pass gas on the first date? No, you're trying to put your best foot forward. But ladies, if you're here today and you're married, do any of your husbands pass gas in their home today? Yeah, of course. Not on the first date. So why do I even bring that up? The thing is that this dating thing that we think is such an important thing is kind of a farce, because the whole dating period, you're trying to look better than you really are, right? But understand that the relationship, as we think about the context here with Ruth and Boaz, is they've been working along side by side for a while. And you want to see how the character of Ruth, what she thinks of Boaz, is she's watched him, how he treats all of his employees, all the people who are gleaning in the fields. And she's probably thinking, this guy's a pretty good guy. So much so when you get to the point when Naomi comes up with this idea to clean herself up and go after this guy, does she hesitate? Does she argue? No way, this dude's weird, blah, blah. No, she right away, I'll do it. So I'm like, okay, all right. Why did, I'm surprised you didn't say something before. No, she's willingly to do it. And her mourning period is over. She is ready for this moment. And I think God is orchestrating through Naomi what is to happen. Now we move into where this takes place in a threshing floor. What the heck is a threshing floor? You see, it's after harvesting, the grain is separated from the chaff. It really is. And it's one of these things where they have to apply some pressure, they beat it, and they separate the part that you see on the wheat that you can actually use to make the breads and stuff. And it's basically separating for what is valuable, what is good, and what is not on the threshing floor. And there's what it kind of is. Usually a very flat surface is where they take place. Now, we live in a culture today where we see the wheat in the field, and the next time we see it is where? At Giant in the bread store when you pull the loaf of bread off. That's we see it in the fields growing, but we don't watch the whole process. Now, the whole threshing thing, look at this, still happens today. They have these things on combines where they go through the field. You ever see that big thing that hangs out and it dumps all the grain and stuff right into that? Oh, the threshing is occurring in the combine. So the process is still the same. There's still this violent shaking or beating to separate that which is not good of the grain to which part we eat that goes in, which then can be used to make grain. So threshing is still done today. It's just not the way in which it was done in this time. So usually when it was done there, it was on a flat surface where the grain stalks, all of it was then beaten and put together through this process to separate the chaff, that which was not good, to that which was good, and that was the wheat that's there for it. And understand then too, often it was also done early in the morning, very early. So then they would throw it up, the wind would blow away the chaff, and then the wheat would fall back down to the ground to actually use it for that then. Also to understand, we've been saying this for a couple weeks, this harvest is taking place in the period of Judges. There's a lot of people doing everything as they saw fit, which included stealing in the fields as well. So you have a very good sense of Boaz is laying out there in the piles, keeping what? His stuff protected. And it's interesting, the plan that Naomi devises is sneak up to him in the middle of the night, because I'm sure he won't be laying there with the club for anyone trying to steal his grain. And so the plan is actually a pretty brave one at that. And then she says, go there, uncover his feet. And apparently he didn't notice it and then lay at his feet. And half the night he finally wakes up and realizes that she's there. It's an interesting thing. But in that culture, it's an act of marriage proposal. What's going on here? She's actually proposing under Hebrew law for a kinsman redeemer to take up his obligation to take her as his bride. It's a way of doing it. It's culturally how it's done. And it's a bold move, like we said. not knowing the future or even how he would respond. If he was laying there with a club in his hand and it was dark and he thought someone was there to steal the grain over her head and she'd be done. You're there stealing my grain. Oh, who was that? Oh, it was Ruth. Uh-oh, I'll just hide the body in the grain pile. That'd be like some murder mystery, right? But he finds out who this is, and she has this marriage proposal to him. And this uncovering and laying at the feet. You see this great humility act by Ruth. And it's acceptance of Boaz's authority as her guardian redeemer. She didn't have to, but she did, and recognized and submitted to his authority. Now here's a pondering question. Do we really glean a person in the dating phase? I mean, this whole process, do we know that, does Ruth really know Boaz? We hope so. But she's submitting to his authority for him to be her guardian redeemer, to provide for her. Now, the last part of this, spreading the corner of your garment out was also part of the process. And it's also signifying like this protection of laying out the garment. Under the wings are being provided this protection. It's also echoes of a marriage or covenant practice. I say all these things because I just want to mention, you hear this in your culture in our time and we say, that's just weird. That's just kind of, you want to see something else that's weird? What's going on up there? A proposal, right? Can I ask any of you, I did this in the first service, why do we do that? Why does a man get on one knee and extend the ring to offer? Why do we do that? Tradition, there you go. But we don't have a clue why we do it. Let me just say this. Thousands of years from now, if someone would look back into our culture and say, what are all these pictures or images that we see of men in beaches and all these places getting on one knee and holding up what appears to be this round object to this woman? It's culturally what's acceptable. So don't look at what was happening back there as something so weird, because guess what? We all do weird stuff too. But it was something that was significant as to what she was doing, and she's basically proposing to her guardian redeemer that she would fall under his protection. Same type of practice. Now here's something else then too with Boaz and the way he handles this. Because after this comes out, he says, well, wait a minute, there is another guardian redeemer that's closer in the family. You really should find out if he wants to take responsibility. Because this is what, in the commentary, David Guzik said, Boaz wasn't willing to cut corners. He would do God's will, God's way. Let me hear that again. He would do God's will, God's way. He knew if that was really of the Lord, then it could be done in an orderly and a proper way. And this is something for all of us to ponder. Are you willing to do God's will, God's way? Meaning, God has prescribed a certain way to handle things or do things. We like to get out ahead of God and say, oh, this is what the Lord, and I'll do it my way instead of God's way. Following God's will and God's way. Let me share a story of something else that happened when we were at the beach. Rhonda and I, we went to the beach the one day, and we pulled in, which is, they say, the residential parking. And each housing person that lives back, because we were back in off the beach, and each home got these 2 permits that we could park anywhere that allowed you to park in the residential parking area. So we went to the sign that had the blue sign, we can park here. So we parked our car there, we went to the beach. When we came back, there was a ticket on our mirror. We didn't even notice it, and when we pulled it out as we were driving away, and Rhonda said, and she said, well, it's because we were parking in a handicap spot. I'm like, no, we didn't. And we were convinced that we did not. We actually had to circle back around to check to see if where we were parking was in a handicap spot. And at the blue sign for the resident parking permit was all there, and right below that was a little wheelchair that said handicap parking. Dang it. But my mom has a handicap sticker. We just forgot to hang it up. You can, and we're reading this, the sticker, the ticket saying, you can appeal this. Oh, we'll simply just tell them that it was my mom. We just forgot to put it out. Here's the proof. Here's the handicap sticker that allows us to park in a handicap spot. Now, I'm thinking that too. To be honest, that's not a good way to get out of that. The price of that ticket for parking in that handicap spot, $260. Exactly. That's what I said. Wow, $260, that's a lot of money. Well, that's the way we're going to handle it. We're just going to get the parking ticket out, and I'm going to tell them that we had a handicap sticker, and we just forgot to put it out. And as my wife and I were talking, That's not what God would want us to do. Nope, it would not. So I scanned the ticket. I paid the $260. Now, I'm one of those people that believe that a sevenfold blessing is coming my way. So 260 times 7 is what? No, that's not what. But the thing is that we realized because we were not handicapped, right? And God's will was that we shouldn't have parked there. And so we recognized we did do a wrong, and I paid for it. We did it God's way in God's timing. Maybe you've got things like that going on in your life, and you think, oh, I could get around this by, and you're trying to justify it. Do it God's way, right? Do it His way instead of your way. That's just a little reminder from that. There's another beach story. So here's the pondering point. Ruth chose to submit to Boaz. Now, here's the thing. Let's tie this in for us today. She's willing to do this and get married to this guardian redeemer. Are we willing to submit to Jesus in our lives? Because this is really where we're getting the head at. Because to lay at the feet of Jesus and to allow Him to rule over our lives. Because we look at this act that Ruth does to humble herself and say, I'm willing to submit to this man and to be his guardian redeemer. It's almost like it's comical today when we hear that type of stuff. But yet Jesus calls us to do the same, to sit at his feet, to allow him to be our guardian redeemer. The gospel reality in all this is that in the threshing floor of humanity, God's going to separate the good from the not good. We in our lives all go through a threshing floor process, and it may be painful. It may be challenging, and there are things in our life, look at this, that God may throw you up, toss you around to separate the good from the not good you got going on in your life. It's a threshing floor type moment when we encounter Jesus. And Jesus over and over and over again will toss us around to get us to separate the good from the not good. How about your life right now? Look, you don't believe all this. In Matthew's gospel, John the Baptist, when talking about Jesus himself, clearly says that Jesus is going to do this very thing. He's coming in, and he is going to separate the good from the not good, the wheat and the chaff. He's going to separate all of it. You can look it up for yourselves. That's the words of Jesus himself declaring that very act of what he would have. So the gospel reality also, in all things, we humbly submit our lives at the feet of Jesus. Nope, I'm not going to give, no. In all things, we submit our lives at the feet of Jesus. Why? Because we trust him to work for heaven's purpose, that he's doing something even in our challenging moments. When it looks like our field is empty, when the field has been harvested and everything is bare and it looks like God will not provide, this is when we lay at his feet and we trust that God will work for heaven's purpose, whatever that may be. Let me close with a couple stories here today. In all things, God works. Really? In all things, God works. A couple days before we left for the beach, I'm packing up, getting ready to go, and it's pouring outside. I mean, it's just coming down. And I wanted to run across the street to get to my car. Well, run as good as I can run. And I hopped down off the street curb because there's like a river flowing down the road. As I hopped off, my bag on my shoulder came down, which my wife says my bag weighs way more than it should, and I have so much junk in there. But it came down off my shoulder as I was going to the ground, and what do you think I heard? Pop! My knee popped. I'm like, oh my! And it's pouring down raining, and then it took me forever to get to my car. I was soaking wet by the time I got in there. There were cars that had to wait for me to cross the street to get over there and get in my car. I drove home, and it was hurting. When I got home, I couldn't get out of the car. And I called Christopher. Buddy, go get the crutches we have upstairs. Go get Abby's old crutches. Yeah, they were small, but I couldn't walk on it. I couldn't put any pressure on it. What you see up here on this left side is me sitting on the chair with ice on my knee. And I thought, oh, great. This is right before vacation. I'm going to be hobbling around all vacation in pain. I couldn't walk on it. I couldn't put any pressure on it. I felt like and I thought, how can God work in this circumstance? Can I share a couple examples of how God worked? On the day that I shared the story about the little girl spilling her ice cream cone. I was sore, my knee was sore, and I was sitting on that bench while Rhonda went over and got me an orange drink. And so because of my sore knee, I witnessed what happened between that mom and her two kids. I would have missed it if my knee was fine because I would have walked over there. And so yes, I can say that God works for good in all situations because you can see his hand working. You can see him doing good things multiple times. I saw God's hand even with my bad knee. And I'll say this, and the reason I brought this up because as I was doing research for this, and this is before I did this, by the way, before I went out and did this to my knee, I found the example of, do you know who this guy is up here? Olympic athlete, Derek Redmond. He actually blew out, look at this, running the 400-meter dash. He was expected to win it in the Olympics. Halfway through the race, pop, his hamstring goes out on him, and he starts to hobble, and he's in extreme pain. And then his father, Jim, right there he is, comes out on the track. And his son, being in so much pain, he puts his arm, and his father helps him across the finish line. Beautiful story, we all say. It's fantastic. Jim's life from that point on was wonderful, right? His son's life, Derek's life, was wonderful after that moment. No. God used that moment. I've been at Promise Keepers events. I've seen hundreds of people submit their lives to the Lord after hearing that story. God used that brokenness for him. Now, in Derek's life, you think, oh, it's great, right? Because after that event, he was unable to ever run again professionally. Oh, he became a professional basketball player, so there God was doing some good. 2 years later, he met his wife. Oh, but a couple years later, they divorced. Wait a minute. I thought this was going to be all the good, happy ending stories. And then his father died, the guy that helped him, about 2-3 years ago. Why I say this about this story is because when the Lord takes you to the threshing floor, it's not just one time. If you're a Christian and you've been walking this walk for a while, can you openly say that God has taken you to the threshing floor time and time again? When there's something bad you got going on in your life and he needs to shake it off of you and get it away, that you live for his good, he takes you to the threshing floor. And he may toss you around and throw you around, but he's trying to separate the bad from the good. And in our stories in life, don't think it's just one bad thing that'll happen and God and the sky opens up and everything's perfect. Over and over again, God works all things for his purpose and his good for those who love him. Maybe for you, whatever you got going on today, God has you on the threshing floor. And you don't know why he's tossing it, but maybe, just maybe, he's separating the bad from the good. You may not see it today. Remember the hindsight thing? Hold on. You may be able to see it a year from now when God is taking you through a season that you cannot stand and you do not understand what he's doing. Think of that barren field. If you're leaving and driving around town the next couple of days, look at the fields. They're cut. They're barren. Does that mean the Lord's not providing? He's not working? He's not doing? Allow the Lord in your life, even in these stretching moments, to separate that bad in your life. Because he's a good God. And if you love the Lord, he will do what he needs to do to separate the bad from the good. Would you pray with me, please? Father, we thank you for these moments and being in your holy word today. And from this story, that even when the fields seem barren, you are a God who can still provide. You are also the God that in our brokenness, and when we're carrying around things we shouldn't be, can take us to the threshing floor. This takes a moment in our lives. Are we willing to humble ourselves, to sit at the feet of your Son Jesus, to know that there are things that you're taking away from us that are not good? But that requires an element of trust in our lives. So, Father, I pray for every heart that they are willing to trust you, to sit at your feet, to know that you are good and that you are separating the bad from the good of our lives, so that we can continue, Lord, to give your name glory and purpose. And we ask all this in the precious name of our guardian Redeemer, the one we call Jesus.